you, Ellie. And of course, thank you to everybody listening and watching us today and joining us live. And for those of you who are going to be listening to this later on, as these conversations get more traction and a lot more excitement. I'm really chuffed. I'm going to, take us on as ever as a relaxed session, as this should be relaxed and it should be confident, but it should also be intrepid. And I mean that because we're going to get these conversations. They're brave and courageous conversations. As ever, DNA style, we're going to move beyond HR speak. And as ever, I am really chuffed that two people I very much admire, and I've got to know more recently in my life, who don't actually I don't think they know Perry and Tahirah know each other. So this is really joy for me that I'm going to the conversations I've got to have with you, the values that I feel like we've been able to share together, but also bring this to each other, as well as the people listening. So yeah, and I just want to say that I'm a bit of a fanboy of both of you, and so I'm quite stoked that we're doing this. So I just want to say that, and I'm going to ask a series of questions, and they don't have answers to them. They just have as I said, the courage to sort of think about how do we think about this in the future. The series of these podcasts is about intersectionality, and I often say that word gets used a lot, but I don't know how many people understand it well. I'm afraid to ask. And I also wonder how many times or how often it's corporatized and stays in HR speak. And what I like about this is you're two people who definitely in my life, which have showed me and shared with me the challenges that we face together. So I'm going to ask a question to you both to explore. And for those of you new to DNA's work, I'll try and illustrate what I mean by the question I'm asking, which is the question is, what does an intersectional welcome mean in the context of recruitment? And really the word welcome is the key part of that how we recognize differences, how we recognize that some people will share them and some people might not. Some people have good reasons not to. And what challenge does that create for the world when people don't share differences? What kind of world do we want to build when people can? I don't know. But it is about the welcome, but it's also about the barriers. And it's very hard to sort of have a conversation, a meaningful one at least, that doesn't recognize those barriers and try to address them. So an intersectional welcome is a conversation that DNA talks about, the anticipatory welcome. But I'm going to ask to you guys really, and for the audience to think about, and perhaps share on the chat, a position on this. So if I may start with you, Perry, first. What does an intersectional welcome mean to you, and particularly in the context of recruitment?
So you use some very key words there that I will sort of play back because they're not HR speak, they are just human speak, right? So differences obviously is one. And I think the term intersectional has very strong attention grabbing aspects to it that perhaps previous categorizations of things we might have labeled as diversity got us into a little bit more of the separation of individuals and their component parts, their life experiences, their belief systems, and now, as we know, some of their kind of psychophysiological traits, right? So I welcome it because it invites people to think a little bit more deeply. I wonder whether there's an advancement on it, though, that we even look at intersectionality and go, it is great, but is it more about multidimensionalism? Because people are so multiple in their makeup and their outlook on life and so on, that intersectionality does at least attempt to say to us, if you are somebody from the global south, and that you have a diagnosed reference point for you on, say, ADHD, and you have a physical disability, your intersectionality is almost categorized by those three things. When it comes to an anticipatory welcome, what that means to an organization that is interested in you becoming an employee of theirs is that they have to look at their standardized processes, which, let's just face it, most organizations are built on standardized processes for efficiency and optimization. They got to think really long and hard about that and go, this is not fair to have a standardized process built for a neurotypical Caucasian European frame of research and reference around things like interview timings, interview routines, interview questions, any psychometric tests, and so on. So I will say my profession, being HR and its links to recruitment, has started to unravel the complexity and the unfairness of some of what we have termed standardized recruitment for good, which is great. So we already see some adjustments being made, but I think it's got a long way to go. And I think we can accelerate that, because the welcome ought to be that whatever my circumstances, I don't have any anxiety about the process. I just want to know whether this is a place worth me coming to work, and whether you will want me to be there for the skills and the creativity and the determination and the commitment I have. Now, that might sound like a massive reboot of recruitment. I think it has to be, because I think at the moment its bar is set in a difficult to prove way of fairness. So I think there's a lot to do. So that's my take on it. It's a helpful addition to the lexicon and the processes, but I see it as the beginning of how we get more fair in recruitment and selection. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm going to summarize that back after I challenged that question back, and I'm probably being provocative, and I don't like using the word devil's advocate, but I'm going to here, of something to get us probably into what makes it work and meaningful beyond being kind. And I think that being kind should be enough. But in truth, we're dealing with transactional relationships in the workplace.
Yeah.
We're dealing with transactional realities.
Yeah.
Being kind should be enough.
Yeah.
It won't be. And it often isn't in times of stress and change and economic challenge. So, but we're going to share the sentiments, but we're also going to shake it up a bit. So I'm going to ask Tahirah as well for you. What does an intersectional welcome mean for you in general, but also in the context of recruitment too?
Just listening to Perry, understandably, intersectionality is a word widely used. I made some notes, so I am going to just read some of the notes. So it, like he said, it was the intersection, recognizing the individuals, that we have multiple social identities, and the way that we interact, and the way how we're created in a very unique way, and we've all got very complex needs and experiences as well. And it's an example, persons, being a woman of color and being a Black woman or a white woman, we're all going to have very different needs as well. So it's understanding that intersectionality is acknowledging the varied sort of challenges and advantages that we have as individuals, and the combination of identities. So you've mentioned ADHD, but how many recognize that a Black or an Asian woman will have traits of ADHD? It's often thought, oh, it's a white kind of label as well. So I know that we're going to go back to labels. So it's avoiding the oversimplification of it as well, and ensuring the efforts towards the equality, the inclusion, and considering the complexities of people's lived experiences. I know, Atif, you're very big on lived experiences and how that can really impact all of us in many different ways. So although we might have a shared experience, but our lived experiences are going to be very different from a male, female perspective, or, different cultural backgrounds where we've lived and so on. So really, it's so diverse and so multifaceted that it can't just be put in one box. I really feel that. So, yeah, that's some notes to start us off with, I guess.
Great, fantastic. So if I was to say in terms of recruitment, what do you think might be the challenges on this? So if I not to give too much away, but I just think, well, no, perhaps I'm looking to you. What do you feel? You know?
Yeah. And again, in terms of recruitment, my own personal experience has been I can apply for lots of jobs, reading the job description, it's a checklist of things that I can do. And yes, I'm compatible to every single one, but it's when getting into the interview, being interviewed and being questioned, you just sense that feeling of maybe I'm not good enough for this post because I'm not fitting all the boxes that are outlined for the interviewer, for instance. And definitely who is the interviewer, and although I know in my own personal capacity I can do the job, but am I going to be accepted? So
Yeah,
it's about being enough, I guess, as well.
yeah, absolutely. And I think for a lot of people listening, it's that feeling enough, feeling.
Mm,
And I'm sure it has to be said, and I know that there's more conversations growing on this.
mm.
It's about knowing that we are enough,
Yes, absolutely.
right from the offset.
Yeah.
The challenge I would touch on is that because of the intersectional realities that we're touching on, and the space in it, and Perry, you almost described me as a South Asian ADHD, and that was a lot of joy to hear. But it's also, I'm not alone in that. I'm one of millions.
Mm,
Mm,
In our millions, though, we are not necessarily safe to tell these stories.
mm,
We kill shame when we tell these stories,
mm,
and we heal when we tell these stories.
mm,
But it takes a lot out of emotional labor to do it in the first place.
mm,
But that's okay, that's what solidarity comes in, and sometimes it pours upon us. The challenge is, should we do it at recruitment stage?
mm,
Should we? And I suppose that's a question that a lot of the audience might listen to and hear. Should they?
mm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think it comes back to equality. We know that equality refers to the fairness and the just treatment of all individuals, but yet again, we become very scared about declaring or showing, on the application form, yes, I've got a disability. Yes, I'm a person of color. Yes, I may have dyslexia. And already without being stereotyped, you are being stereotyped. So,
Mm. Mm.
yeah.
Perry, your thoughts on that?
you took me to something that I think is getting increasingly more evident in the nature of the stories we tell, right? So in psychology, there is the kind of narrative identity of us, right? The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and that we tell others. And Tahirah is absolutely right. When we're in an interviewing situation, it doesn't feel like we're telling a story about us. It feels like we are having to reveal some categorized aspects of us that we know have a legal aspect to them, that companies have to kind of do this. Now, that doesn't make us feel any better about it, I'm sure. It's almost like just an academic point of entry to this. So I come back to that narrative identity in the sense of a story. There's a huge irony here in that we go through a transactional process of, somebody once said to me that most job interviews are just two people across a table lying to each other. And it's kind of true in many respects, right? Because the company are overselling their culture and their prospects, and the individual saying, well, I'm not going to reveal too much about me because I don't want to spoil my chances. It's like, what's going on there? When they get offered the job and they come join the team, a lot of companies and teams are now saying, oh, why don't we create like a user manual about each other so that we know each other? They call it the washing instructions or something like that, right? It's like, why don't we do that at the start then? Do you know what I mean? Why don't we get to know, who are you? What's your story? What lights you up?
Yeah.
Where might you need some help from us? What does the future look like for you in terms of any conceivable trajectory you want to be on? And then let's talk about some technicalities and let's talk about some capabilities. But I mean, I can't think of anything more welcoming than being asked to tell the story of you in a way that you're comfortable with, right?
Yeah.
So You know, why don't we do that? I don't know is the short answer to it, because it feels like we've got to keep it untransactional because we don't want to know all that gooey soft stuff. It's like, but that's who I am. So there's just a poser there that you've made me think about, which is, why don't we ask for those stories up front?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess what I heard was the rich tapestry of who we are. You know, we're not just our color, creed, religion, sexuality.
No.
We're a lot more than that. We're not just the ADHD or the dyslexia. So we have an array of talents that never really get seen. So, you know, personally, from an experience, I've worked in so many different jobs all my life, and it was really just getting someone to see I've got talent. There's something
I
in.
know.
So yeah, it's
If-
really difficult.
No, but Tahirah, you light up when you say, I've got talent. It's
I know. I noticed that. There was physical movement there as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, folks listening to this, you have talent, right? You are enough. These are words, but we're drawn
Everybody.
to these things. We're drawn to these conversations because we feel marginalized. We feel like we're fighting. I guess that's why we're listening to this today and here together. I have Perry, you sort of touched on a couple of things. I'm going off script slightly, but it's okay. I'll bring us back. But it's this richness of, as a CEO, of an organization that's committed to this conversation, and look, the team is made up of 86% of the team were self-defined as disabled or neurodiverse. I think statistically, fundamentally for me, the excitement around that isn't that. It's actually that the majority of the team, I think 68% of them, are the first of their family to go to university. So that's about social capital change, and that social capital in many cases helps create agency. Self-agency or self-advocacy is so what that basically means is you may be able to tell a story. You may even have gone to a place that tells you how you learn. May even have gone to a place to find out where you really do well in your learning. But that's not always the case. It's not always, and even when you've gone to university, that's not to say that that's happened. And Tahirah, you work in psychology and Perry, you very much so in the exercise of the job and the amazement that you bring to HR industry. It's so progressive. My job as a CEO, when I'm interviewing people, and I think it's the job of anybody interviewing people, and I love the description you gave about two people lying to each other. I think it's great. So my job, and an antidote to that, and I always say this, is not to catch people out.
No.
My job, I have an hour and a half to make somebody shine. I don't know what it takes to do that. But I'm going to find out. My commitment is to say, here are the questions in advance, not because you're asking. Because, and it's not cheating. I want you to shine. I want you to know what your best looks like when it has a chance to prepare for things. If you would like to go for an interview but actually make it a walk, then we can do that. If it's hard to make eye contact and it's performative for you to make eye contact and sound more charismatic than you can casually be, then let's not do that. And even if, and this is a good example, you don't ask interesting, erudite questions, it doesn't mean that you're not interested. It just means you're thinking. And what I'd love is when people ask me questions after the interview or send videos or WhatsApp notes. It doesn't matter. What matters is a sense of themselves reflecting. Because in truth, we're spending more time at work than we do with people we love, the hobbies that we have, and the choices we really want to make. And our social economics are a capital. Even the access to changing our lives is tied to workplace. So of course, people will do what they've got to do to pass that interview. But that doesn't mean the sincerity is showing up, unless I think that responsibility is on the hands and the shoulders of the person doing the interview or the people doing the interview. I guess that's the welcome, isn't it? All right. So I'll ask another question, which is, and this is about the gaps and challenges. So as a neurodiverse change maker, which I totally think you are, and of course you're an advocate, and that's how we met, right? But what do you think are the most common gaps and challenges? Do you know, in sense of we feel this work, right? In recruitment, we can sense what we're doing. You've done this incredible directory to help people address the inclusion gap. What are the big gaps that are really not making this work right now?
Wow. Again, very much to the core is the equality, diversity, the inclusion, creating an environment, where every individual has a chance to shine. I know that you said, Sean, when I'm saying I've got talents, it's because it's been really hard to be able to come to a point and share that I'm important. I've got talents. I've got things that I can participate in. I, can promote the participation, the collaboration, the sense of belonging for everyone to be able to do that. And I think especially what the things that you do, Atif, yourself, is providing that inclusive environment that appreciates the leverages that and the strengths that diversity brings together. So in a roundabout way, I think I'm trying to answer your question, but there's so many layers to it. It's so multifaceted, and I think Perry touched on that right at the beginning as well, that it's not an easy job, but it's being able to be honest. And yes, it might be two people lying to each other, but more so, it's two people really trying to shine through and make the best impression, like wearing your Sunday best, on a Sunday to go to church, or if you're going to a mosque, and trying to look your best and trying to be your best as well. Yeah.
Great. Absolutely. Perry, any thoughts on that as well? I know there's lots of gaps, but what is it that's making? Because the talent conversation, I love hearing it. But I also wonder about the terms in which we discuss it. We can have the illusion of a conversation, but I wonder.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I've been qualified in some British Psychology Society approved assessment techniques, right? And they are, validated by tens of thousands of people who have completed certain aspects, so that you then get medians, means, averages, and all that kind of stuff. And I can absolutely see the intent behind them, which is to avoid the lying discussion exchange that I talked about. It's to let's give some science to this, but we know that the way they are constructed is likely to be at least unhelpful to some people, because they don't take into account an intersectional aspect to their life that means whilst you might have normative curves, they're not on it because they're different. And it's like, how reliable is that test then? The answer is probably not, actually. So we've got to be really careful. So this is a gap, really, how much we rely on instruments that are built for norms, distribution, bell curve type things, right? And that we take an approach which says we need a whole series of data points, don't we, in order to be generally faithful to an equitable outcome. We cannot just say, here's a psychometric test. If you can't get that right, you can't work here. It's like, what, really? It's that absolute? So I think there's something about a bit of a wake-up call on that respect. Now, I know that people are now starting to adjust recruitment campaigns by saying to people, you can have the questions in advance, because we recognise that some people need that reflection time. I think that's a lovely thing to do, because it should be about being able to prepare Sunday best, as you said, Tahirah. That's exactly what people want to do. You don't want to catch them out. You want to see them at their best, Atif, like you said. So there's something in those gaps that need some much more sophisticated, nuanced, co-created ways of not just saying, oh, hang on a minute, we've got one person on our interview list today who has a described condition that we need to take account of. It's like, well, that's not exactly a welcome, is it? That's by saying we're going to have to wheel in some extra kit and do something different for you. That's, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? It is almost like, can we create a smorgasbord of options that we can tabulate at the end of the process to say, out of this is the two best candidates that we want to talk to, and that is fair and equitable about everybody's chance of success. So those gaps are pretty big, Atif. There's a lot we need to do about that, and the more we've got things like this panel to kind of just flag them up. I don't have the expertise to solve this problem, but I know it's not right as it is.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's not just being able to pass the psychometric. It's like doing a grammar test and not knowing that you're doing a grammar test. You know, I know very early on in my childhood, coming from a background that, you know, parents wouldn't have been aware of what I was learning at school, never got to
Yeah.
read the reports because I read them myself, or an older sibling would read them. But, you know, looking back, I do remember doing what looked like a grammar test and failing it, but not even knowing what I failed because I never understood the test in the beginning. So
Exactly.
that underprivilege that you may have, even by doing a psychometric test, because is your brain wired to actually know what a psychometric test looks like, or what answers you need to give? What's the algorithms
Yeah.
in there?
Completely. Yeah.
I just share, I worked in a bank for years, and it was entirely about performative culture, how much European bankers, and I was lucky, I felt, to get the job,
Yeah.
especially from the class background and the space I grew up in. But the psychometrics were just painful, not just in the mental health laws, but evaluated. And look, you know, famously said, it doesn't know how to ask the questions it's supposed to ask. Talent, a version of what we deem to be acceptable talent, is what might show up until that talent becomes famous. Everybody says, oh, they worked here, they were great, oh, we knew them. I said, okay, they were quiet, they struggled to make eye contact, they invented something that changed the world. I get it. But would they be saying the same kind of thing that you're saying now? Do you know, I feel that, having experienced that sense of learning isolation for so long, but then feeling quite liberated in my own life to share a story, to kill shame, be part of an organization that does it every day to so many other people. But I do remember it quite clearly, how challenging it was just to fit in and hope you don't stick out, rather than feeling. All right, so then there's a challenge, isn't it? That because talent in recruitment is precisely what we're looking for. It's precisely what we want, right? But we know that people are going to mask because they've got good reason to. We know that competency is a question that isn't necessarily safe if you're going to share differences until that organization can earn it. I also feel, you know, that talent and trauma lives in the heart of greatest people in the world. It truly has and truly does. But like I said, it's often recognized when it's famous, rather than when it's actual and evident just amongst our colleagues. Right? So people will share, I've got this and I've got that for job protection, not because they feel welcomed. So a question I like to ask both of you is, can an organization tailor its strategy and its recruitment strategy to say, we get it, that we get that it's different from people from the global south, to perhaps talk about neurodiversity, as Perry's touched on, and Tahirah, you and I lived through. Can an organization, we get that it's really hard for people facing trauma, even if not especially mental health loss in their lives, to know that this might be a conversation that could cost them the interview. But we get it. And we don't just do performative stuff on Mental Health Awareness Day, but we say here at this stage. Can we get an organization, we are committed to the disability employment gap, not during the month for disability celebration month, but every month and every day, as Ellie rightly said. And we get it because we owe a debt to neurodiversity and innovation. We owe a debt to the differences of people and the stories they weren't able to tell us in the past. We so hope and so strongly believe we're stronger when they tell us now. So we're going to do this interview stage. Can organizations transfer that experience at interview stage in your eyes? And if so, how? I'd like to throw that to either of you really first.
Will I go first?
Please.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start with an example I've seen of how somebody has disrupted the interview process. They're a technology company based in Michigan. They are pair programmers. They work in pairs, but they've taken that principle across the whole organization. So everybody works in pairs, they rotate, because what that's enabled them to do is have a higher quality level of output. because people can check each other's work and it works really well and they learn really quickly. The maturity curve into excellence is shorter. But their interview process reflects that, because as a pair, your job is not to get the best score in a coding scenario. It's to make sure the other person gets a good score, right? And that's how they do it. Now, that is just me using one illustration of how to disrupt it. But I think the principle is that recruitment is such an important decision that it feels to me like we are still functional and even, dare I say, a little bit rushed in it. It's like, oh, got a vacancy, get somebody in who looks a bit like the other person and can do what the other person did, quick as you can, bum on seat type thing. It's like, well, hang on a minute, that's the most important decision you're going to make, and perhaps the most important decision they're going to make. So I wonder whether the call in, the big disruption here, is that we take it away from its current delivery method, which is hard press leaders and whatever, and we either get teams to participate in recruiting people into their team, or that we have professional and lived experience people who say, you can't do anything about recruitment until I'm in it, because I know the science and I've got lived experience, and therefore I can make sure this is absolutely as equalized as possible. Now, that is going to take a massive turnaround, but I think it is potentially the way we have to be in recruiting in the future, because at the minute it is below mediocre. It is as poor as you like, and we don't stress test it in any way, particularly for equity. So you've got me thinking about a bit of a mission now I want to push on with, but that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I love your solidarity and your convictions, Perry, particularly in knowing what you do. And as I say, when I talk about HR speak, I think it's really confining itself into safe language rather than
It is
the urgency of participation.
Yeah.
And the urgency of what we're collectively losing when so many people are not participating in a healthy way.
But before Tahirah comes in, I've just got one more thought, right? Organizations have a memory. And that memory is constituted on their processes, protocols, their backstory, what market they serve, whatever it is. I think they have a really forgetful nature when it comes to their recruitment techniques. They haven't got a strong enough memory of how do we make this work and make it work even better. They just skip from campaign to campaign, and that's a real poor show on organizations.
Formative behaviors, yeah. Tahirah, I just wonder, it's for you as well. Do you want me to sort of repeat the question or the explanation around it as well?
Yeah, definitely. I was reading it in the chat box, so you can definitely.
Yeah. So really, again, it doesn't have to be verbatim. It's really this thought. Like, I mean it. Like, there is no shortage, particularly on LinkedIn, of organizations showing good work on performative days and calendars and things, and showing that care. And I think there is a lot of sincerity. I think there's a lot of insincerity too. But the challenge is to know the difference and to feel it, but also build the difference when you're in the organization. But of course, a lot of people will naturally hide at an interview stage because your competency has been questioned. So my challenge is really, the question is, how does an organization say, no, we mean it, show us? And my question is, okay, you mean it, I believe you mean it, show me how you show it at interview stage, that you do at interview stage that shows us that you mean it, because we will spend more time with you than our loved ones, our friends, our family, our choices, our hobbies. Make us love you. Show us that you're worthy of our love. What do you do at interview stage?
I think a combination of what what you've both said, and I think you mentioned trauma being there as well, and often from a psychological point of view, we often talk about trauma being the wounded healer, the wounded one that's gone through the process of being rejected, gone through the process of being accepted as well, and then while you're in the job being told that you're not good enough, and that's the conflict where it comes through, and you don't feel good enough because then you've been labeled as not acceptable or not sort of good enough for the job, because while you did the interview, as Perry said, you did tick box everything. But if there's a body doubling going on, it means that maybe you can shine in other places and your colleague can shine in different places. But it's also the legacy that you will create by actually getting past the interview stage. So somebody once said to me, the biggest challenge is actually being accepted. your application being seen, accepted, and even if you don't get the job, it means that they saw something, and that gives you the internal validation. Well, maybe I was good enough, but not for that particular organization. So it's not losing heart either. And yes, there's change that can happen. And as Perry said, there are ways, and that memory bank needs to be keep evolving it, keep innovating it, keep seeing what's the difference with a neurodiverse person and what's the difference with a neurotypical, and can they both perform on the same level, or can it be that the neurodiverse has something more to offer, like the lived experience, like the talent show, that they can be the chameleon, they can be the one that multitasks and gives you a little bit more as well. So there's so much more, and it's the question itself has got so many layers to it as well. It's structural, it's functional as well.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Tahirah, you just made me go to a place where I think anybody can do this, right? So why don't we have a bank of recorded and audio and scribed and all formats of, this is who we are, and this is how recruitment works here, and people can consume that before they even step into a situation where they've got to then share information with people. Because if your workforce is diverse enough, you'll have a lot of people who could tell a story that people go, that resonates with me. But actually, because of my intersectionality, I've heard that and that and that, they both then talk to me. And that's almost like a form of recruitment/interview coaching. That's not giving anybody a special advantage. That's creating equality and equity in that field. Every company could do that. This is how our recruitment works.
The key word, inclusion, equality, diversity, let's really mean what we're saying. It's not just empty words. Let's really share and show that we mean it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I think that's what I was passionate about.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. I'm really enjoying this. So I suppose the question is like, I guess we're seeing a trajectory, right? We're seeing a trajectory. I think I'm reading from both of you, or sensing from both of you, a positive linear line moving in a positive direction on this. And I am going to push towards my last sort of question, but I kind of still determined to be a little bit provocative, because I share with you that I love some of the conversations that are growing. I love doing just this idea of perhaps even me, I'm just using me as doing this podcast is so healing for me, considering you'd have to have known me 20 years ago, but this is, I'm someone who struggled to make eye contact with people, partly because I felt learning isolation, or just the way I learned, was so illegitimate, or even something worse than that. That how I spell or how I navigate language or writing determines my intelligence and determines my sense of identity and usefulness in the world. Now, that person is far away from perhaps where I am in the world today, and that's the joy of my life, that I get to see that. And more importantly, I suppose, and I think it is more important, that representation opens the doors for a generation of people of color, who saw somebody like me and you, Tahirah, and others, that we hear, that we are people sharing stories, we are people killing shame, and we are people opening doors. So it will need to be intersectional to be relevant. Because if it can't, then it's I think another extension of performative behaviors and buzzwords, and not things that are actually saying deep down, we have got to get it right, not because the people are using these words and this language, but because we're not going to get to a collective space, one that's about participation rather than disabilities, one that's about talent rather than who's got what neurodiverse label, and really about the richness of what we're learning when so many marginalized people's experiences are informing our process and our identity, and the civil society, our organization and our company is fostering in, So they're big things to ask for, They are, but they're not impossible, really, are they? I mean, they're not. They're not really.
Yeah.
So I would ask you both, is knowing that these things are still transactional, there's still things that are still seen in the idea of let's do good things to good people, which I think is a good thing to say.
Mm.
But we're not in the space that says we are not in a good place, and we may never get to a good place if we recognize this isn't about disabled people or them.
Mm.
It's about us, about whether we are actually relevant and meaningful in the work that we do. And if so many people marginalized are not participating in choices and leadership, can we be just relevant? We can certainly be homogenized. We can certainly be around, but are we meaningful? These are big questions. So I'm going to ask you both. Maybe if that didn't, is that I'm really excited and positive that it is moving in a hopeful way. I mean that. Even with some of the experiences I might have faced when I was younger, I definitely feel very positive about what's ahead of us.
Mm.
But I also want to be challenging to myself to say, how real am I? I'm a CEO now, but that's okay. I'm still a father. I'm still a husband. I'm still a human being. So I'm asking this to myself, what keeps me truly hopeful is what pushes me, not what's easy, but what pushes me. So I'm going to ask you both a question, which is, in the context of intersectionality, in the context of recruitment, in the context of anything, in this work and the challenges that you guys do, what keeps you hopeful? And I'll invite Tahirah, maybe if you would like to go first.
Yeah. And again, Atif, as you know, great respect for the work that you do, great respect for the fact that you bring it to the table. And it's that, it's the change in mindset and the shift, and then being able to just to say, let me put my hand up and say, yeah, I've struggled. I've had challenges, but I'm here now. And anyone can, like Perry mentioned, it's the can-do attitude. We can all be there, but it's about who's got the strength, the ability, who is there ready to say, I want to put myself forward. It's not an easy task to do. It's not easy to say, well, yeah, I'm willing to put myself out there and put my face everywhere, or just to say, this is what I do. Especially knowing that we've had challenges where maybe in the past we couldn't have put a sentence together, or look people in the eye, but suddenly with experience, with the challenge, and with being able to promote our own selves and put us back on the pedestal that we truly think we believe, really has helped as well. So
Great, super. Tahirah, thank you. Thank you. Hold that as well. Harry, same for you.
I loved how Tahirah explained that essence, really, of where this feels like it's heading and so on. I'm going to add to that by saying there are three things I'm hopeful of. One is that organizations really are starting to take seriously their kind of social obligation. They are not seeing, some more enlightened leaders and organizations are not just seeing themselves as in a market, but as part of the fabric of life and communities and society. And so therefore there's much more openness and conversations about that, which is great. And ESG, for whatever people think about it, is giving it a spotlight. And some organizations are absolutely showing that they want to reach beyond their commercial or service level values and end up in a place where actually communities value them and so on. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'm really hopeful about is the fact that science is advancing and telling us more about what we can know about all sorts of intersectionality and things that we perhaps haven't got names for, but we now have, and then we can add them into the mix of our multidimensional thinking. So I like that. And I genuinely think there's a fight back from people who have weaponized the woke word. There's a fight back on that. It's like, how dare you? I'm pushing back on that. There's a kind of proudness of being woke as its original intention, that actually people are kind of going, I want to be that, because that almost feels like it's the thing that you can say, sits above all the intersectionality anyway, and definitions and labels and categorizations. It's like that's the one thing that might unite a lot of people. It's like, yeah, let's all rally around the wokeness then and kind of reclaim it. And I'm seeing some of that agitation and activism, but the science and the social obligation feel like they're the more tangible things, and the woke is more a sort of cultural backlash to the weaponization of it. So those three things really do give me hope.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I think this, well, not to open up a powder keg on woke, but it's just participation. What does healthy participation look like?
Exactly.
Whatever words people might use to try and destabilize that question, or the love and the intent behind it, tells us is a moment of truth too. But these are not new things. I think these are constantly. I mean, the printed press led to changes in class struggle, even cost the head of a king in France. But no one called it woke. It's just a thing that led to changes and revolutions and such and such. And I suppose we just find new ways to stop social movements and social inequality being real. I think probably the birth pill and sexual revolution in the 60s as an example of that. It wasn't woke, but if they could called it that then, I'm sure people would have done.
Exactly.
But these aren't new things. I guess they are just things that are changing through people's need to be liberated and heard. And I suppose there is a discomfort to that. But I am totally excited by this. I feel like you guys have done exactly as I had hoped, the sincerity in which you've given it. I hope people use the chat as well to give us feedback in what I'm going to hand over to Ellie, but I would love people to use the chat just to say what they felt after the session today and how to stay in touch. But please, if I can hand over to Ellie and thank Ellie, to thank Perry, to thank Tahirah for all your time and everything today. So much.
Absolutely. Please do share in the chat what keeps you hopeful as well, so we can keep that conversation going. And first and foremost, thank you to the three of you for sharing today. We've talked in a few of the previous panels about how exhausting EDI work can be when it essentially involves fighting for your own right to exist in spaces. And one of the most exhausting aspects of that is sometimes it can feel completely out of your hands, and in some ways it is. I think, Tahirah, you mentioned that idea of, I know I can do it, but will I be accepted? And I think what the three of you have highlighted is the changes that we can make to ensure that everyone does feel not just accepted, but welcomed. And some really, really great, clear and simple suggestions that those of you in the audience who have a role in recruitment can really take away in action. So thank you to the three of you for that. Our next panel is on the 12th of December, and it's called From Bias to Belonging, How to Make Inclusion Explicit. That's going to feature guest panelist Vic Mazonas, who's the General Manager of GAIN, which is the Group for Autism, Insurance, Investment and Neurodiversity, and Hannah Litt, who is Head of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion and Anti-Racism at Mindweaver. So make sure you join us for that. In the meantime, the videos from our first two panel sessions are now live on our YouTube channel. So that's What is Intersectionality and Why Does It Matter with Shani Danda and Cameron Malik, and What is an Intersectionally Feminist Workplace with Marcia Brissett-Bailey and Samantha Hugh. And finally, if you want to delve deeper into the conversations of today, remember that Diversity and Ability provides training and consultancy packages for organisations of all sizes. So whether you're looking to embed inclusion in your recruitment processes or expand your team's confidence in diversity, inclusion and that anticipatory welcome, you can scan the QR code to have a conversation with us about that. And thank you again to all three of our panelists and to everyone in the chat for contributing today. Thank you.
Thank you.